Daniel and Michael will show you briefly, plus discussions from the floor, where we could bring together a sensible way of improving screens for 2D crystal collection. So rather than wasting any time, I've got a series of things I want to go through if we've got the time to do it. We're going to pass over to Thomas, who's going to just add his comments to this morning's lecture.
Okay, so there's some ideas about these incomplete fractions and whether we can sort of come up with an idea to do this screenings. I personally have a huge problem, just from my experience, to generalize anything into the crystallization. It seems that there are really hardly any rules that you can follow. However, there are some statements that I, at least in my lab, few of the things that I really believe in, that I really think are general. And so for me, the most important thing really is that we try and make the protein happy. So one of the things is that people always try to get a lot of protein, but this is actually not the highest priority to me. What you want is high quality protein. It doesn't help you to have a ton of protein that will never crystallize nor aggregate. It's much better to have very little protein that is of very high quality and you can actually reconstitute it and get nice crystals. So before you try to increase the yield, look at the protein whether you can actually reconstitute it and how it works. And then another thing that I believe in is that you should really try to minimize the time where the protein is in inversions. So the most important time I feel for making 2D crystals is the time between you solubilize the protein from the membrane and you add lipids back, because as soon as you add lipids back, you get actually mixed micelles, and the lipids in the mixed micelles help to protect your protein. So therefore, I'm also not so sure that we have, at least in 2D crystals, to be so sure that the detergent is perfect for the protein, because you only have to keep it happy for maybe a day or two, and then it has protein, then it has lipids again, and then you stabilize it with the lipids. So we can actually work with a little bit harsher detergents than extracrystallographers, so we can work with octaglucoside to make the dialysis fast, and so on. So that's another thing I believe in, that you really want to minimize the time the protein is only in detergent, and then you can use harsher detergents. Then a very important thing for me is that I just simply don't believe in any type of reproducibility. So if you get a result from a test wrong, never believe it. Always reproduce it, exactly the same conditions, and see whether the results that you got are true. Because even if you think that you purified the protein the same way twice, it's never the same. Even the protein concentration, to get the accurate protein concentration, is never going to be the same. So, and the protein concentration is important for lipid-to-protein ratio, so really never ever believe just one reconstitution. So at least try it 2 or 3 times, and if you get the same results every time, then you can actually believe it. And I think one of the problems that we have is that people actually believe everything in reconstitution and draw conclusions from that, and then never try it again, although it might actually have been a good condition. So these are very personal statements, and you can completely disagree, and we can discuss this. And this is really the point tonight, that we discuss what people feel about these things. And then another thing that I really believe in is that every membrane protein is completely independent, even if it's the same protein family. So I work a lot with aquaporins. None of the aquaporins I've worked with have ever behaved the same as any of the other aquaporins. Aquaporin 1, I found, I think, one condition when it doesn't crystallize. Aquaporin 4 never crystallizes until you actually cut the tails off. Aquaporin 0 is somewhere in between. You get very nice crystals with one lipid, but I think we can also get nice crystals with a different lipid, but not with all lipids, and so on. So if you think that aquaporins and lipid doesn't matter, you will never get crystals, for example, with some aquaporins where the lipid actually matters a lot. And there are aquaporins which are only reconstituted in one lipid and other ones. So whenever you start with a new membrane protein, just consider it completely fresh start. And then, so that's another one. Never assume, I really don't believe in reproducibility. So once you have a batch of 2D crystals, it's worth more than gold. You will never ever get it again, so that's your basic idea. If you get it again, and even better, you're very happy, but in a moment, this is all you've got, and treat it this way. So the upper point 1 structure we got with one batch of 2D crystals, so we could never reproduce the crystals to the same quality. But this one batch was enough to actually get an atomic structure. And so that's also why I don't feel that it's a high priority to try to get the reconstitution trial small, because if you get a very small batch with very, very good crystals, you're going to be so frustrated, because it's not going to be enough to actually get a structure, and you might not be able to reproduce it. And so the last point is really don't give up. This might sound this might sound funny to you, but literally the upper point 0 crystals that went to 1.9 angstroms. To me, I wanted to give up the reconstitution before that, because you couldn't get the 2D crystals, the double layer 2D crystals. So it's not a technique where you should give up easily. You can always, sometimes you get an idea and it works, and then you're all set. So these are very general statements, but these are the few rules that I personally deeply believe in. And then, so I had a lot more slides, and so this is only now for dialysis. So that's what we are doing in our lab. We mostly, actually almost exclusively, well, we do also monolayer, but mostly for membrane proteins, we do dialysis. And so there are a lot of things, and what is fun, if you talk between different 2D crystal people, it's very hard to actually get them to agree to something, because there's a lot of black magic involved and a lot of beliefs that others don't really see it through. So the detergent is obviously a very important factor, and a lot of people feel that it has to be really, really good, the protein has to be really happy in it, it has to be stable for several weeks, so it's a good detergent. I happen not to believe that. I want to keep the protein happy until we give them again new lipids. And so this is clearly something that my group doesn't agree with me. And so also detergents, if you have very strong ones, you can completely delipidate it. And that's actually a problem because some proteins need the lipid. So it's really, the detergent is obviously, the way it treats the protein is very important. Then a while ago, so this went away again, is that you are best off if you use a mixture of high and low CMC detergents. And so people believed that this. It never made sense to me, because the moment you start to dialyze, you actually remove the high CMC detergent and then you're just left with the low CMC detergent. So why does this make a difference? And the other thing that people came up with are these are just statements that I have from the literature or from different conversations, that people feel that if you start with a high detergent concentration, you get better 2D crystals. Again, it doesn't make much sense to me, because up to the CMC, to me, I don't see why a lot of detergent would make a difference than little detergent. When it really happens, it's when you reach a CMC, and that's pretty much, doesn't matter with how much detergent you started. So this is my view, but this is really up for discussion, because there are different views around. And then obviously the lipid is important. So for me, the lipid to protein ratio is probably the most important reason to get really, really high resolution, highly ordered 2D crystals. And the reason why it's so reproducible, I think, is because simply it's not very easy to determine the protein concentration with high accuracy, and because you have pipetting mistakes, so the lipid to protein ratio is rarely what you actually think it is. And then there's also a discussion whether you want to have single lipid or lipid mixture. The idea with single lipid is we want to start with a very simple system, which is very controllable. The advantage of lipid mixture is that the protein can actually choose the lipid it likes. So again, these are just different philosophies. And then again, this is an example of something I really don't believe in. I don't believe that pre-incubation of a protein with a lipid, so it just makes it in detergent, you leave it overnight, and then you start the dialysis the next day. So to me, there's no big difference whether you actually do this or you just immediately mix and start the dialysis. But then again, there are groups that say that only if you pre-incubate the protein with a lipid, you get reconstitution, otherwise with certain proteins you don't. What the basis is for that, I can't tell, but there's just observations like this. And then obviously the protein is very important. It's not just the purity, but in my opinion it's also the oligomeric state. So if you have a high oligomeric state, if you have a trimer, a tetramer, it's much easier to reconstitute or to crystallize than if you have a monomer. Similar principle of virus self-assembly. Once you have a shape, it's easier to build and assemble it than if you have just a monomer. And also you want to have a pure oligomer, so that's my belief. Again, this can vary, other people don't believe that. I believe if you have a mixture between a monomer and a dimer, it's very hard to get a nice 2D crystal than if you start off with a pure dimer situation. But then again, once the protein is in the lipid, it might be arranged, it can actually form tetramers, and then it doesn't really matter what you start with. But this is really a point for discussion, whether this is important or not. Then concentration, protein concentration is an issue. So if you actually drop your concentration of the protein too low, and you have a certain lipid to protein ratio, there might actually be not enough good a chance that the lipid finds the next protein and the protein comes together. And so if you drop the protein concentration too low, you actually might not get 2D crystals. And what we found, if you actually raise the concentration of the protein, you usually, in many cases, you get bigger crystals. Not better ordered crystals, but bigger crystals. Then the question is, when you have a recombinant protein, do you want to cleave the tag or not? If you don't cleave it, it's a his tag. Do you want to put more ions in so you can actually shield the charges and so on? So this is what we get to the crystal with the tag as well. So it's not necessary to actually cleave the tag. And if everything doesn't work, then we usually try to work with homologs from different species, we work with mutants. But this is really something, is when you really try everything else, because expressing different proteins, purifying different proteins is difficult. And then obviously the buffer, the dialysis buffer, there's endless stuff that you can vary. And so obviously the type of concentration of the solid, which mostly affects the ionic strength, the pH, depending if you have a pH regulated transporter, obviously pH is very important. Sometimes you have to reduce the protein, that it stays nicely monomeric or whatever. Then divalent cations very often make a difference to the membranes that you get. And the effect that these divalent cations can have actually varies. Sometimes you can shift it from a vesicle to a sheet-like 2D crystal. Sometimes you can get better order. But almost always divalent cations have an effect, we find, in our hands. And very often magnesium has the milder effect than the calcium. So if you get an effect at 10 or 100 millimolar magnesium, you can get the same effect very often with 10 millimolar calcium. Calcium seems to be a much stronger agent.
Do you think cations or anions are more important, or do you know whether cations or anions are more important?
So this is a very special thing to magnesium calcium. Just we use calcium chloride and magnesium chloride. So the solids that you use, I don't know whether we know
what about sulfates?
So we never try sulfates. So this is another thing that we don't try, but we can try obviously. Then obviously inhibitors and ligands, if you have proteins that are transporters and you have anything that you can bind to them to actually put them into homogeneous conformation, to freeze them in one conformation, you increase the chances to get crystals. And then a recent idea is to sometimes, if you want to get to high resolution, you use trehalose or glucose to embed your crystals. But this can actually sort of dehydrate your protein, or it can also lead to an osmotic shock. And so it might be an interesting idea to actually grow crystals in the cryoprotectant itself. But so far, I haven't really any evidence that this would make any difference, and this is really a very low priority. And then finally, there are some physical parameters. So temperature control and changes, cycling of temperature up and down, is sort of an annealing idea. And then dialysis speed is something that I actually believe is important, especially when you get into the range where you reach the CMC, because that's when really everything happens. And so if you can actually slow down the dialysis at the time when you reach the CMC, you can give the protein much more chances to arrange nicely. And so that's something that we have tried recently, is actually to dialyze a reconstitution mixture against the buffer where the detergent is at its CMC, and what we got are bigger crystals. So it seems to make a difference, but it certainly needs much more experiments. And so these are all different parameters that you can check, and you can basically come up with as many as you want more. And then just So the way that we grow crystals, or sometimes, so our idea is that 2D crystallization is a multiple-step process. The first step is you just basically want to get the protein into a lipid bilayer. So this is pure reconstitution, and the lipid to protein ratio is not so important. But if you cannot reconstitute the protein, you don't have to try to crystallize it, it just doesn't work. So basically we start with a primary screen where we will just try to reconstitute the protein. And so this is our way to do this. So this is something that we can now try to exploit and do the combinatorial, the factorial thing. And so we start with a standard protein concentration of 1.5 milligram per ml. A pretty standard bath flow, just pH 6, I like pH 6 for some reason, a normal soil concentration. LPRs, we usually just start at 0.5, 1 and 2. And this is really not so important, it's just we want to have enough lipids to reconstitute the protein. And then what we really vary the first time is the lipid itself. And what was interesting to me is that the lipids that we actually use to try are obviously also the ones that are most successful. So we always try these 4 lipids first. If they don't reconstitute the protein, then what you can try is to pre-incubate with these lipids overnight and then start the dialysis the next time. And if these lipids don't work, then we try other lipids, so phosphatidylserines obviously sometimes are successful, or also lipid mixtures to try to give the protein as much chances to get the lipid that they want.
Is there a reason that APC is not on your...
There's no, well, this is a lipid mixture. So this is the second. I like to start with very simple systems. And then if this doesn't work, then we start with...
E. coli is a mixture too.
It is, but I just have very good experience with it, so I always push this into There is superstition involved. So in such primary screens, what we really just want to do is we want to identify the lipid that works to reconstitute the protein. We want to identify whether we need to do pre-incubation or not. And this is, again, this is something very new to me because I actually told my people not to do that, but now I just came back from Japan and Yoshi swears that this is important, so now we try it again. So the rules are now long-lasting. And then we approximately, but really, this is a very broad range, we roughly get an idea of what the LPR is that would be useful. So this is a primary screen, then we go to the second screen, and this is really the big one, where we try, so in this case we really want to try and get 2D crystals now. And so the protein concentration we don't change, it's still the same, but now we vary a lot, all the buffer, different buffer constituents, divalent cations, all this stuff. And then we also start to vary the LPRs a little bit more around where we think where it's useful. And what I find is that a lot of the proteins actually crystallize in an LPR around 0.5. So that seems to be a good LPR. So what we try to do with the secondary screens is really to identify the buffer conditions and to identify the LPR. So basically we now want to optimize the protein-protein interactions. And so now when we have basically produced our first 2D crystals, what we now do is to try and find the golden batch, the one batch that you need to get the structure. And so in this case we often increase the protein concentration because when you increase the protein concentration you get bigger crystals, but you don't want to do this all the time because it's more protein consuming. Then we vary the LPR, but now very, very narrow range because we just want to basically accommodate for pipetting mistakes and protein concentration misjudgments. Then we still vary the divalent cations just a little bit around the concentration that we like. And then we can also try to change the temperature of the dialysis and the dialysis speed and these sort of things. And now there's really the discussion whether this would, for example, be something that you really want to do at the end or whether you want to do this already very early on. And that's where this factorial approach might be actually superior to this approach. But this is just basically the way that we think about reconstitution and 2D crystallization. So that was my spiel.
Thanks, Thomas. So, as time's pushing on, I think Daniel, can you do in 5 minutes or something like that?
Yeah.
You want to present? And then I really do want to open it up for discussion in a minute so we can get everybody's feedback about what your ideas are about the best conditions that can get into school.
two slides. I completely agree with what Thomas said, the different steps that are important in practice and the way you do in your life. I just wanted to add some information that we have on the mechanism of 2D crystallization that may help for the understanding of what is going on. Actually, most of the data that we have on the reconstitution process involving the protein are coming from the reconstitution of high lipid protein from the functional state. So we know that there are mainly three mechanisms of lipid to protein association. Those mechanisms are dependent on the detergent that is used. If you are doing reconstitution with detergent like Colate, C12V8, actually the only way to produce a proteoliposomes is that you start from micelles of lipid protein detergent, you remove the detergent, and you have proteoliposome, which means that the amount of protein that is incorporated in the liposomes is directly related to the amount of the micelles of lipids that were present at the beginning. Okay? On the opposite, with dolicin mitoside or OT-glucoside, there is another mechanism in which you can incorporate proteins into proteoliposomes destabilized with detergent. So in that case, the detergent allows the direct incorporation of the protein into the liposomes. So those are the two extreme mechanisms for the formation of the proteoliposomes. And in between, there is one mediated with triton extended, in which in that case you have a transfer from those lipid protein detergent mixture to the liposomes. So that's what we know from the proteoliposomes as high lipid protein master. If we try to translate it, to expand it to 2D crystals, just by looking at the different results of crystallization. There are also possibly three mechanisms of crystallization. In that case, I remind you that the amount of lipid is much lower, and then lipids also participate in the mechanism of crystallization. So there is the most favorable mechanism in which first the detergent is depleted from the mixture of ternary micelles and binary micelles, and then there is a formation of a layer in which the protein is inserted. There are still some detergent, and upon detergent removal, there is crystallization. So the three steps, depletion of detergent, formation of bilayer, and crystallization are separate steps. The other mechanism is that all of these three steps occurs at the same moment. For example, in the case of PS2, 2D crystals appears while there are still some remaining detergent at the beginning, during the process, which means that in that case the 2D crystals occurs like bricks that are forming a wall, even if it's still in a lipid detergent mixture. And the third mechanism is that first the lipid bilayer is formed, and you have like aggregates of protein and detergent that are formed separately, and then after upon detergent removal, they mix again and they form the crystals. That's happened sometimes when you have after detergent removal, you have like a huge aggregate of lipid and protein, and upon time incubation, you see some crystals that are growing from the stuff. But I wanted also to mention one point. I don't know if you remark concerning the pre-incubation was related to our group or not, but I wanted to point one thing which is important for me. When you add two a protein in detergent when you have some lipids before detergent removal. In most of the time, the people are adding lipid as solubilized in mixed micelles. So you have mixed micelles of lipid and detergent and mixed micelles of detergent and protein. And what you want to do is that both micelles are mixing before detergent removal. Otherwise, if they don't mix, you will have this mechanism, which means formation of a pure lipid liposomes and aggregate on the other side.
So this makes sense to me, but what I don't understand, once it's thought that they have it still takes a long time until you reach a CMC. And during that whole time, it can still mix.
You're absolutely right. That's why, from my opinion, in most cases, if dialysis works, when you mix solubilized lipid and protein, it's because the time of incubation is very, very low.
So how much do you think it takes to get this mixture?
So, in that case, I don't know. What I can suggest is that since also you have with dialysis sometimes protein on that side and lipid on the other one, I suggest that instead of adding solubilized lipid, you add liposomes, which means the amount of lipid that you need for the correct LPR. But instead of adding as a solubilized lipid, you add it as liposomes. With respect that you have enough detergent in the batch. So you have, for example, 0.1% DDM, your protein is 0.1% DDM, is largely enough to solubilize liposomes, the amount of lipid that you need. And in that case, by adding liposomes, you force the lipid to be solubilized by the micelles that contain the protein.
If you have so much detergent, only a part of the detergent has protein solubilized. There are also a lot of normal micelles without protein.
Right. Right.
So this,
But I think that you increase the chance to have more tinier micelles. Because as we know, the lipid can't jump from one micelle to another one. The lipid can't. So the only possibility to mix them is that you have coalescence of micelles. So that's it.
Okay. So what would you like? Right, so I'd like to now open this up for discussion. What Michael's done is, just before this session, we met up and Thomas and Daniel and Michael have put their ideas together into one table as to what factors might be useful for screening. And I would suggest that what we do, if the others agree, Thomas, I don't know if you agree, but I think we should maybe say focus on the initial screen where we try and identify where there might be a possibility of getting crystals. So the first stage of your four-stage process. Does that sound? I think the main problem is trying to identify roughly where you get your crystals, which you all agree that that's. All right. So, Michael, do you get this one? So while we get this set up, could maybe you start the discussion and see what factors you guys think are important from. Who's had good crystals and what worked for you?
Well, maybe I start by telling what I once tried and it did not work. It was, I put magnets in all the dialysis.
We know that.
You know that with the magnets? So I put magnets there. I thought, well, the alpha helix has a dipole moment, orient all the proteins in one direction, and then they already oriented and they just snapped in, right? It did not work. Because you will need some hundreds of Teslas to come up against KT with the dipole moment versus the times the magnetic field, and that's the bad end. So I also tried electric fields, current through it, yeah. Doesn't work because you just produce hydrolysis and water can explode in the end and naturally it does not work. And then, I don't know, but my guys seem to be better than me, but when I tried to harmonize to do something, it always dried out. You know, you have this stupid problem, right? And so the drying thing, sometimes you fill your dialysis machine with 50 microliters, and then sometimes it just dilutes to 100 microliters, or it dries out. And I think the best crystals I, by chance, had, which were lousy compared to others, were still the dry ones. So I thought, damn,
So
this
increasing
right.
concentrations.
Yeah, and so my thinking is now that I'm trying to suggest it to my people and just say, well, I need you stay with your France and we do the reset. Anyway, my thinking is if we can have the dialysis machine on the table and the dialysis bottle under the table, so then you have a negative hydrostatic pressure in the dialysis chamber, and then the gas goes into the bottle, through the table, through the dialysis machine, and your air bubble increases to control, dry your sample. And then they tell me, well, it's not reproducible, and sometimes it dries and sometimes not. And yeah, she's shaking her head. So, I don't know, those are things that I try that usually don't work. Any other ideas in that direction?
Who's grown good crystals? So we've had Thomas's one. So what worked? Who has, sorry? Hector. So where's Hector? Sorry. Hector, what worked for you?
Pretty much dominate a good description of the philosophy in the lab.
Maybe laugh actually when you said that the lipids you used are the ones that seem to be the best. I thought that's probably because you've got mainly your crystals in those 5 or 6 ancestral structures. But so Michael's put up these factors here as things that we should maybe use in the screen. So yeah, go for it.
We've sort of got a couple of different schools of thought on this. One is the different doing the liquid pre-screen, and then this was so that's something you could consider in conjunction with
I
this.
wonder if the rest of the audience back there would hear you better if you faced
Turn
that.
around. Easily done.
Can everybody read that? Without eyes?
I'm just trying to put the whole thing on the screen. Okay. All right. So you can easily drop any of these parameters at any time. So if, for example, you wanted to take the approach that Tom mentioned, where you pre-screen lipid and therefore lipid protein ratio separately, then you would just drop A and B out of the table. But these are the factors that we've got in there. So then A, B, C, D, E, F, similar to the one that, and G, similar to the one that Ben showed in his talk earlier today for the 3D approach to soluble proteins. And we've identified some important factors there. So obviously the lipid type, things we talked about today, lipid type, pH, temperature, lipid protein ratio, anion and cation, and detergent. All right, and then just array those into an incomplete factorial just by random number selection. So we've got properties A, B, C, D, E, F, and G across the top, and 35 experiments. So as Ben also mentioned today, you need to have at least one experiment more than the total number of parameters you tested. We've got a total of 33 here, so 35 should test that statistically well. So
Assuming they're independent. If they are not, then this doesn't hold. Okay.
yeah, true. Okay, and so then if we translate that into words, you would come up with an incomplete factorial screen or something like this. Now, it's not completely random because one of the reasons it's not completely random, this is only a minor reason, is that not all of these anions and cations are compatible with one another.
Could you stay up for a while because I haven't
What do you want to look at?
Yeah.
Where?
Have you all read that?
That's all right, I'll leave the last page up in a minute.
Okay.
I just wanted to make the point that not all of these anions are compatible with these cations in terms of solubility. For example, if you try and make magnesium citrate, not very soluble. So anything that's not soluble, I've noted here, and then when that comes up in the random number screen, just pick a different number. So back to this page here, which is probably the one you want to look at now, right?
We're still on the first one of them.
Well, this is okay. So you win both ways. So essentially, you've just got a random combination of lipids, lipid to protein ratio, detergent, buffer, salt, temperature, and 35 conditions, which you could then throw your protein at these 35 conditions. They're not all going to work. You don't expect them all to work, but it will give you an idea for what you would use for secondary and tertiary screens in the future. Okay, So that's the ideology behind the design.
I have a problem with detergent. Are you going to purify it in 5 different detergents all in the same day?
It's not practical, is it?
I
So,
mean,
No, the
it
thought
seems
was,
like
the
you
thought was
lose-
really to purify your protein, whatever detergent you choose, and then add a detergent as a separate thing. I think we have to make the screen simple or people won't use it. And again, it adds a little bit of complication, but at the moment we're just trying to do a wide screen. So Michael, could you just go back to the front page? So I would suggest now that what we do is have a look at these factors and see whether these factors incorporate the things that you think are important, or whether there should be other factors in there that should be included. And then that will allow us to start refining these screens and identify the number of trials. Or do you think this is a complete waste of time and do you think there should be a different way of doing it? Is there a better way of screening?
Well, of the answer, small, right? From right set it up to 2.
Yeah, but this is a different at that point. This is actually really a crystallization screen.
Should we increase the range? How much do you think?
If it's supposed to be a crystallization screen, then I think I would at least go to 0.75.
Okay. So
How do you distinguish between the counter anion and the counter cation? Because if you bring in a salt, you will have both in.
yeah, you can take a range of salts, but so you can add like calcium chloride, calcium sulfate, and mix not calcium sulfate. Okay.
If you talk about independent parameters, I think, how do you distinguish between the activity of the anion and of the cation?
Because if you've got, for example, if you have magnesium chloride, magnesium sulfate, calcium chloride, and calcium sulfate is a bad example, let's take it in. Then you can treat everything that has been done with magnesium as one, everything that's been done as calcium as one, and say, is magnesium or calcium? And the same way you can say everything with chloride, everything as a sulfate.
just that comment you made about the detergents earlier. If you look at something like the MEMFAC factorial kit that BHankamer provides for 3D crystallization, they suggest what you do is purify your protein in a detergent that is stable at 1 to 3 times the CMC, and then use MEMFAC for the reservoir solution. So I think probably the most convenient way to treat this in that respect is to do the same thing. Choose a detergent that your protein is stable in. And then we've seen the slides earlier today from Daniel, and I think Dan has one as well, where LDA on its own doesn't give crystals, but adding OTG does. And so looking at these detergents is like an additive, which may improve crystal formation otherwise.
So, Bob, before you mentioned that you thought that you had certain favourite lipids, for example, I thought from your discussion. I mean, would you say that this is a good coverage of lipids? Is there any you would remove?
I'm not familiar with brain lipids being a very productive one.
It's a different, well, there's a lot of PC there, and so it just samples different space, essentially. Like, you can sit there and go PC, but then Tom gave the example today of the aquaporin that doesn't constitute PC at all. So I think it's important to have an alternative there, sort of thing.
But just my opinion, if you left the brain one out, there'd still be plenty of variety
I
there.
think you could also leave the cholesterol at this point.
Okay. Daniel thought cholesterol was
That was Daniel's suggestion, yeah, which I've just incorporated now.
Yeah, no, and I think if we have a sort of discussion in doubt, we can just leave it in. It's only one more variable, so it's not a big deal. So, but I think the point of the brain one is good. We can take
But
that.
this is a mixture of ACTC, ACTA, and cholesterol. That's one condition with 3DL.
This one here. Yeah. What was the Michael? What did you?
That was Daniel's suggestion.
Okay. Daniel, what was that?
Yeah, thank you. More seriously, if I say that, the main reason is just from my opinion, we have to look at what is going on with cholesterol. If we are interested in proteins, and in the future I think that we will take care of cholesterol or cholesterol-like lipids. So I mentioned this one. So it's clear that if you use largely all proteins at the moment, you doesn't care for presence of cholesterol. I used to do this mixture also with the others, and I don't see honestly difference between egg PCHDA or without. But I just, maybe you can remove it, but just, I would say that we have to keep in mind.
Would it be better as a separate factor? You could also take it out as a lipid and just use it as a lipid additive.
But I think that, I say cholesterol, but I can have also sphingomyelin, which is one important lipid, and up to now, it seems that no one works.
But would then a better way of screening this rather than having, because in a sense, if it's a non-independent
so
thing,
just
it's an
put
LDT.
egg PCHDA.
But I think your idea of adding another category of things like cholesterol as an additive is a really good one.
Right, so we could maybe put cholesterol, take cholesterol out of A if you like, and just put it in as an additive, just so that it will be randomly mixed with other lipids to see what effect it has. Okay?
Maybe you could use, DTG as an additive. It might help whenever you prove it.
What's DTG, sorry?
The diethyl, not diethyl,
Octofluorosis.
yeah, the octofluorosis, the fusogen sort of things is what I'm
Oh, okay,
thinking.
okay.
In my head, yeah.
Any other, sorry,
So it's quite a different direction, but I think this must be some kind of a multidimensional optimization problem. A very complicated landscape, and so I think I could also think of a more mathematical way to approach the problem, and maybe to talk to mathematicians what they think would be a good strategy to find the optimum conditions, or this could be maybe if you are close to an optimal point, there could be a gradient to go along this gradient as well. So certainly a kind of a mathematical
No, I think
process could be.
does anybody have any other ideas about ways of screening this in a more appropriate way?
So, I mean, looking at it and deciding in which direction you have to go by just understanding what happens, you can't. Yeah? But sometimes your crystallization trials look like crispy cornflakes, and sometimes they look like a water bag that just fell down, a balloon or so. And a crispy flake, I would think, needs more lipids, and a fluffy balloon needs less lipids or more magnesium or so. I think we don't know enough of what happens to understand that, but that would be nice for Pierre to do that, right?
So
you look at
in
one
the scoring,
image,
in the scoring approach, I showed it this morning, but I didn't go into those details, was to start off with the point that you have soluble protein and the end is a good crystal. I think a total of 10 different steps. And I took the point that getting a small mosaic crystal was more valuable than getting a large piece of crystal. So I've scored it in a way that crystallinity, anything that's got a crystal in it, is towards the high scoring end, based on size. And then the things that form larger structures are better than small structures, kind of along these lines. Which I think takes into consideration what you're saying. So if you get a large vesicle which is highly protein packed, that's more valuable than a large vesicle that has low protein packed.
I think that's very key in this approach, that you define the outcome. The good crystal, because the quality is really not good enough, you have to qualify good.
Yeah, so that's what we've done, and I can maybe pull that up in a minute. But if we can just focus on these factors, just to try and to see if there's any other additives.
The phosphate copper might not be good for screening in this negative stain. So maybe it's better to use MES for this station.
Yeah, good point, actually. Yeah.
For the initial screen, do you think the temperature is important versus optimizing the water?
So, okay.
This is a few things. It is important because the base diagrams will tell us the very different of the temperature. So if you make 3 crystals from 100 volts, you have to always give a different temperature.
we thought that this cup would be better to use ketogenic temperature, like if we use a tricon. 40 degree might not be. That type of example.
You have to keep the 4 degrees. For the temperature. Or the grease means breathing.
So what about adding the native lipids? If you have a hard protein, adding hard lipids, if you have
I think
How to get native lipids?
in some cases at least, hard lipids you can buy, and brain lipids you can buy.
The only problem with that is that it's going to be different for every person. So make this
Yeah, but if you have, then just try the lipid where the protein is in the home.
Well, what we could do is we could just put in a blank box saying native, and you can choose to fill it.
What if possible, yeah.
So that would be
What about the negative staining as was mentioned before? Is that generally used using acetate, or why not PTA or molybdenum?
I think the general feeling is that the structures are fairly stable, and that will just change. You shouldn't really alter the structure in terms of identifying whether you have a crystal or not. It's just a matter of your preference.
It could also be that the grain size of the negative staining determining the fragment package.
Yeah, but
That's
this is
actually
just
a good point, because the field options don't see so it's actually the idea to calculate which one's going to run on the way.
Does anybody know of a 2D crystal that falls apart? You put it in your last grade, so I don't. But there are protein assemblies that do bacterial flagella people that will just be trying to stay with your last grade. So
I think purple membrane will not diffract if you use mineral acetate. And it loves PTA. Diffracts very high risk.
We can see that you're also understanding unit format. It also can.
I mean, do we include that in the screen, or do we just
No,
say?
no, that's just something.
Yeah. Okay. So, are we happy now? Okay, we've changed that to phosphate for the mess. We've done the lipids. We feel fairly confident with those things, and
So
temperature seems to
cholesterol is
be.
now an extra.
So cholesterol is now extra. Okay.
I mean, if you take cholesterol, then I would also put like sphingomyelin or other like important lipids, which are like uncommon lipids, into the category.
Okay. Sphingomyelin. Any others that should maybe be included? See, I can also imagine that what we're going to do, I mean, if we make this, if we sort this out and you give it out to the community and you try it and see whether it works, and we keep some kind of record of the results, what we might find is that there's certain areas that has a higher hit rate. Then we can start homing in on those areas, but we have to have it as broad as possible to try and find the best results as well. So I think that's a good idea, and we want to take it out or put out once in
I mean, the LVOs very much depend also on how you estimate protein concentration. I don't know, some people they use the 880 value, or they use Bradford, or they use BCA, Lorry, whatever is on the market. So perhaps I don't know, it's better for us to have a wider range, or it can really make a big difference.
Right, so we just need these two stop talking and that's so the comment was just that the LPR that we use depends very much on the protein concentration, method that you choose to determine the protein concentration. And therefore maybe we should have a wider LPR.
Or define which method to use.
You'd have to say that.
So my call with this is it becomes very, very broad. If you want to run a bit more than you have back, you don't start to have a problem to get enough proteins to really go for that. And so once along the way, how specialized you want to have this screen. I mean, cholesterol, all these are good ideas, but do you want to have this in an initial pathology? And so we had a good idea, in my opinion, to have actually an edited screen like Hampton. You have the two basic conditions, and you can use an edited screen.
So what do we think would be, too many screens? What would be the right number of screens? What would be too many screens?
I mean, it really depends if you have a content code, and sometimes getting 12 conditions together is difficult. But it also depends how big you make this sample. I mean, what are the coding years that people are working with?
I mean, would it be sensible, as soon as we've got everybody together, to try and identify what the main factors are, and then people can say, well, I can only use TWalz trials, and then choose what they want to do. Because otherwise we might miss.
Such as bring the cholesterol at this point, a thing on the
But
iron.
we look at this for
No, it's not an extra factor. No, this is a general sort of, for example, also classical waves and these sort of things are all interesting to check. But is this really one of the first things that you will check?
I think the conversation is starting to go a little in the direction that I'm thinking, that the buffer, the pH, the kind of ions, and so forth, and the detergent should not be considered a parameter in the original search. Because you've worked really hard during the solubilization stage to find out what buffer you should use, what detergent you should use, what pH. And you already said the first priority is to have a happy protein. So if you found it, then use that as your buffer for crystallization and reconstitution.
But what about
the situation, in my opinion, changes the moment that you bring lipid into it. The moment you have to mix nicer, the lipid actually keeps the protein quite happy. And then you can actually play around again with the buffer condition and try to get the protein from contact outside of the membrane. So I think the buffer is an important one.
Okay. And I was thinking about the presence
So
of OTG.
I agree with the person, so
Now, what about the OTG story? Well, you might find that you put OTG in.
if I understood him correctly, it only works with LDL, but nothing else.
Well, HTG also works with BHankamer. So
Then put it in. But the other thing that I don't understand again is that you have this mixture between BDM and OTG. The OTG should be gone long before the BDM actually reaches the
no, because the restriction has been done with biomass and the detergent are removed at the same
This
rate.
is the dialysis. This was about dialysis. Oh, right, sorry.
so we can decide whether we do dialysis or dialysis as a first one, or something else.
Likely my opinion is that because we can be able to with those detergents we should homogeneous molecules apart from much of the which is the thing. There are a lot of other OTG
But it also was for BDM to hidden things, that is something that is very interesting, because really makes this complicated.
Okay.
But I think the very first thing to decide now is really whether you want to have a biopiece or for dialysis, because then these sort of things make just differences.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's personal preference. I think that the use of biobeads allows you to put it in something like the thermocyclone or something like that you can quickly set things up. It does allow you to try these interactions between detergents. So that's
So you actually always try to use the conditions that you got the biobeads and to reproduce them with dialysis.
absolutely. Yeah, that would be the second phase.
Does that work?
Well, I haven't tried dialysis that much, so.
Because it's sort of difficult if you get biobeads with great results.
Yeah.
But you usually don't get very, very high resolution versions. For that, I still think you need to do dialysis, but if you can translate the conditions that you find in biobeads to dialysis, then the biobeads is not so useful if you want to go to really high resolution.
Is there any evidence to suggest that's not the case?
I just don't know. I don't know the big
I would have thought, I mean, you said, okay, it's very difficult to reproduce in that sense, I'm careful, but I would have thought it should be a logic of doing one and then the other. But, I'm aware that time's pushing on, sorry.
Yeah, just I wanted to ask, what are your feelings? Are these parameters independent or not? So is there only one needle in the haystack, or are there multiple? Because if there are multiple, then they are not independent.
Should the valent metal ions be in the same group as the monovalent? I mean, are they?
I suppose it could be. Yeah. You see any reason why not? The monovalents and divalents together.
Well, you could separate them, but it's hard to separate them. But then,
Increase the number of screens, right?
well, not that you increase the number of screens, it's just, then you'd have, like, is there a need to have more than one salt?
I would separate calcium using both of those three of these are special ones. So having zinc and calcium might be different than just having zinc.
Has anybody else used any other particular ions that didn't work particularly well? We found sulfates often work quite well with example.
I think that's why zinc +3 should be +2, right? So you should gadolinium use for +3, something like this, because zinc is
I mean, I don't want to drag this conversation out longer than necessary. If you feel this is sort of a point to stop, that's fine. We can stop there. I just want to get a sense that this is...
How long can the glucose be kept?
How long can a tube... I think that depends on the protein. But, how long can a 2D crystal be kept?
Years. I'll go far into years.
It's
It really depends on the product, and if you have a very subtle transport of, I don't know, you almost kind of go 2 weeks.
Just making an observation, I'm coming from more of a 3D background. You know, obviously the comparisons you're trying to draw to the 3 factorial are there, but you only screen 3 parameters really in any of the screens that you get in the 3D crystallization screen. And you have very, I won't say strict outcomes, but you know, you have precipitate, a couple of different kinds. You have some sort of phase, and then you have crystalline, whether it's microcrystals or real crystals. So if you define something maybe more as what you should be getting as an outcome, and maybe minimize the number of different things as an initial trial, I don't know if that would be something that would be easier, because there's many more of the 3 parameters that you're trying to screen.
So actually, in Carbon Codicate, they had about 7 or so different parameters that they were screening as well. So it's not all that different.
It depends what you consider a parameter. Right. You're considering a parameter as a buffer.
No,
But also remember that the Hampton screens are the refinement of what Carter proposed.
Hampton
So,
screens.
and that's what you're talking about, we need to do.
That's what we need to get to.
Right,
And we
right.
haven't got there.
So also, I mean, do you have a lysozyme standard? I mean, is there something that you could say you could plug into these, maybe a few of them? Because, I mean, all of these, what you need is to test. You know, so you take 3 different membrane proteins from different classes, beta barrel, different alpha helices, and you just throw them into this matrix. As a start, anyway.
That's right. I think that's a very good idea. And see whether we find even there a space or something. Kenny's point before about do we have one crystallization condition or multiple ones? My guess is that there's probably multiple ones, but I'm not sure. So, for example, we've got crystals. Actually, you know, with photosystem 2, we've got crystals with calcium, with magnesium, with sulfate, with fluoride, with zinc.
But then the question is, if the calcium, the pH should be one thing, and the magnesium, the pH should be something else. That means they're coupled. And then this class matrix thing wouldn't work.
If you treat them as so, yeah, I mean. So there's 2 aspects to that. One is you could just put it in, but that's what Carter and Carter did, and they found there were certain conditions which just didn't work, and they then eliminated those from the screens as well. The other thing is they actually looked for a couple of conditions which help. So not only do you find what the main factors are, you might find, you know, that temperature and OTG are somehow coupled. So you will also find this.
So some other idea that I would like to throw up. Thomas Braun and Basis started always to pool 2 samples on one grid, and then you have only to check half as many grids. And if you find crystals, then you go back to both samples and check which one it was. It had crystals, but if it's just precipitations in the beginning, then instead of 33 samples, you only look at 16.
Could you build 10 samples on a grid?
No, but there's a way in high throughput screening and in industry, they put 4 times 4 on a grid. So you screen 16 conditions by looking at 8 samples in the 4x4 matrix, which is as efficient as pooling 2. And then if in one row and in one column there's a positive fit, then you know which one it was. So
I think that's a really good idea actually, because it does save, EM time is a very labor-intensive field.
yeah, but not if you want to score as each sample as you want to do it here. But if you look for just reconstitution or precipitation at the beginning, you can cut your screening time by half.
If you're using sphingomyelin and cholesterol, isn't the formation of gel phase domains a consideration if you're working at 4 degrees or 20 degrees? So those aren't necessarily independent unless that doesn't inhibit crystal growth.
So what you're saying is if you put cholesterol in and say 4 degrees, you might get...
Like cholesterol, sphingomyelin, and POPC or APC, then you're likely going to get RAF domains.
Yeah.
So you couldn't necessarily, if you want to inhibit that, you wouldn't do it at a lower temperature. So that wouldn't necessarily be random either.
Well, so, okay, so yeah, that's the trouble is when you do a first screen, we don't know, well, we have to generate it randomly and see what comes up, and then have a look at those things individually and see whether they're likely to work or not. It's a complete, useless trial, and then have to do that.
It's like inside the science from
yeah, hyperphosphate. On the other hand, you could say we're going to put it in anyway, leave it as it is, and say, well, clearly these are bad conditions because that's the fact that it mixed together, they interact in a bad way, and we don't want that. Can I just, okay, just to draw this to a close then, if we design something like this and put it all together, would this actually be useful to everyone? Did you see yourselves using something like this, or is this just can you compare those?
I think having this list would be helpful.
I think
we don't have to use it, but
we could be reasonable.
You think to a condition, so
I just don't think you could, with most perhaps you can't get enough to do 40 buttons of 40 biodegree assays in one day.
not, it doesn't have to be in a day.
Well, when you different protein preps, you have your LPRs are off, your...
Why can't you just grid them and put the names down and look at the samples the next day?
No. You can't get everything together. You can't purify a protein always to do 35 samples at once.
So what is, alright, so what do you think is a reasonable number of samples? What should this screen be? How big should it be? Are we looking at 10 samples, 20 samples, 30 samples?
I would think about making pre-tests. So Hammond's would be something that you can actually check the constitution just by sucrose gradients or sucrose step centrifugation. So you can check something so simple, for example, to your lids, etc. And you already reduce.
Good idea. Okay, so Henning, what do you do?
Well, it's not me. Vincent's Unger thing, it goes back to him as far as I know. He adds purified membrane protein with lipids and takes the detergent out with a lot of biobeads. And then he has either precipitations or membranes. And what he has, he puts on 2 molar sucrose and centrifuges that a few hours. The membranes swim on top and all the rest goes down. Then you fish the membranes from the top, put them on an SDS gel, and look if there's protein or not. If you have protein, then the protein was reconstituted. And if not, then it sank down because it was in precipitation or in a single particle.
That requires a lot more protein than dialysis.
No, you can go to very high level protein ratio and use only very little amount of protein.
But that amount that you can see on using silver stain?
Yeah, what you can see on an SDS gel, silver for example.
Well, if it's recombinant, you can also use a histolytic antibody or something.
Yeah, Western. And you don't need the electron microscope for that. And that saves time. Yeah, you can use the microscope later, but that saves time.
You can use the microscope while you're spinning yourself.
Okay.
That's okay. If you get more and good samples, you need an electron microscope afterwards.
right?
So does that sound like a good idea? So should,
I don't know,
should
I tried this method, and David tried it, David Porsche, and with a negative success actually.
Well, we actually
I don't know
do
why it worked and why it did not work. I don't know. I made a step gradient actually, and we came only to the conclusion probably that there is some protein that gets enclosed in vesicles, and that it's then still floating out with the membranes or whatever. So we did not have consensus for that. Can you remember? It was David and me. We did a lot of experiments with that, and it did not work very well. But it might be different for other people.
Are we actually doing that?
No, but there is a difference between
what Ian said and what you say. This what you say is centrifugation in one concentration of sucrose. It's not gradient, as you mentioned. First, it's not a gradient. What you mentioned is a step-by-step sucrose at centrifugation. So
no, I made a step gradient, so it was like two gradients. It's like it's two or three. You take one extreme and then whatever, not water but 20%.
Yeah, 60%, 20 and 10%. It's the simplest.
But you see the lipids floating. You can see that very easily.
Yeah.
And then you take this.
Even if you get this band, you don't know whether it's just sticking on the membrane, whether it's incorporated.
No, it's membrane protein. It's membrane protein.
No, it's not. It's just impractical. Has it been working for you?
But sucrose gradient, the people who are working for functions, they are doing it every day. So
it was
very easy to do a sucrose gradient and to separate it. Maybe it's difficult in our hands because we don't used to do it, but a sucrose gradient is a simple way.
So whatever way you do it, the idea was just to take factors out and test them simple or different. You could get a smaller.
How about we do this then, in the time I'll come to you. So what we could do, sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm coming back to the idea. Anyways, it's not a sedimentation at the equilibrium, what you suggested. What Vincent do is that we simply try to separate aggregates from non-aggregated protein with the postulate that in presence of lipid, the protein is associated with the lipid and then flows at the surface. So this one is a good hypothesis.
And
good
also
postulate after reconstitution. So you can do that, just put your samples on a 2 molar sucrose gradient, you speed it down at high speed. If you have protein at the bottom, it's activated.
So you can eliminate those,
So
even
that's
if you're not sure about the top, you can eliminate the ones at the bottom, which simplifies your scope.
It doesn't mean that the protein is homogeneously in all of the liposomes at the same lipid to protein ratio among the population of both liposomes, but it means that the protein has released. Otherwise, we don't.
I have a different question. I mean, it was said that different protein purifications are different on different days. So if you even can't reproduce that, how useful is then the loop screen, where you want to draw conclusions for future experiments?
If you make the same screen several times and you get the same answer,
Okay, good. But then this means that you would have to do the screen anyway several times.
You have,
So
to,
then
you have to do every screen several times. Every time you check any parameter, you should do it several times before you make a conclusion from it.
Yeah, but you said that different protein purifications are different. So how do you know that negative result that you get them by the second time depends on your protein purification or on the screen?
If you do it 3 times and you get the same result 3 times, and you by using a random number generator, you're going to use random numbers each time. So you're not going to check the exact same things. You're going to use that to check the space, and if the same area of the space works, then you probably have a positive hit.
So it strikes me that we're going to have different problems for different projects. Some people will have lots of protein, some people won't. And I think the best thing we can do is have as wide a screen as possible tonight, and that individuals would have to then take these factors and choose them on the basis of their particular project. And that way you can say, I can only do 12 screens, you choose the ones you want to choose. And maybe that's the way to go. And I'm happy to be a point of contact for that, to start those things up, and we can make these things available on the web as a starting point for people to have a go. And it would also be nice, I suppose, to, if things do work, to get some feedback from you so we can get some kind of record of what works so that we can refine that screen and put it out again so that we can gradually move the community forward in that direction.
The interesting thing is you will find out what works on the papers.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting to know what never works and you always try it again, because that's never possible.
In my hand, I always experience.
Very much. Why would be so?
I said it. So that's actually based on statistics and vacancies from the papers that we publish as well, to a large extent, those conditions there.
So Michael went through those hundreds of papers and pulled out the best conditions, and that's
It would be interesting to mine the literature. Maybe some people already have a pretty good idea, but to see of the things that did give some kind of crystal, how much overlap is there with these parameters and these choices?
That's what it's based on. That's what Michael did. And the graphs I showed this morning, we saw the distribution of different detergents and how many human crystals. So Michael's done that for detergents and for lipids, and I believe also for ions, right? The current ions, Michael? Yeah, it's just about to come up.
Hard to see, but you get a general idea.
So these are different. Actually, I can't even read.
There's detergents used for purification and crystallization. Lipids used by mystery component and cations and anions, buffers, additives, etc. Is that sort of thing you're talking about?
I think so, but did you add a few things that weren't actually used that didn't actually give success in the literature?
No. Well, the Optimizer series issues.
Oh, yeah.
So, for example, we looked at the HLB values and the distribution and tried to take some at different points. We tried to take some ions at different points within the Optimizer series as well to try and sample difference. Because, people keep trying the same things over and over again. You stay in the same space, so we need to try things as well as the ones that are in the literature. And they may not work, but at least we sample the space.
If you have to limit the number of samples, I guess you'd want to use the ones that were the most successful in the past, but then at the expense of the point you just made.
Yeah. Right.
I think what we're looking at is a very small sample set as well, so it may not necessarily be representative that something's working because it's the best. So if you had 40,000 2D structures, like you do for X-ray structures, I wouldn't do that for starters, but that sort of data would probably be more representative of what works, as opposed to this field where you've got 100 odd structures.